Hello and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with me, the 80s Mixtaper. Hope you've all had a good week so far and are ready for your weekly fix of 80s pop culture. Today we continue our deep dive into April 1982 and the back six tracks of Playlist 39. But before we do that, I have some interesting news. It's a story I can't quite fully comment on yet, but as people who listened to the last episode of the pod will be aware, we had our first divergence in song choice for Spotify and Apple Music, notably related to the track I Won't Let You Down by PhD, a favourite of mine, with Apple Music users getting the Jim Diamond solo version and Spotify users getting the PhD version, or so I thought. However, when I came to compile the playlists, Spotify users will note that you got the Jim Diamond version as well. And that is because in the intervening fortnight when I last checked the tracks, the PhD version had been replaced by a cover. But not like a cover band cover, by someone almost trying to pass themselves off as the original. What was weird was it was attributed to PhD along with the, 8 million streams. It was genuinely fishy, and since then I have raised it with the band members themselves, who also agree it is unusual, and have also raised it with Spotify, but whether they come back to me is anyone's guess. As to the outcome, who knows, but I'll keep you posted into this particularly odd story. So what's in store for us today? We kick off with our first appearance of Bowie on his own since Scary Monsters. We get the UK trying to replicate its success and make 2 in a row at Eurovision. The Geils band have their final moment on this pod, and Haircut 100 start to fracture. Bananarama come to the fore, and we explore the daft magic of the Shouty Football Cup final song. As always, we can't play the singles on the pod due to copyright laws, but if you go to the episode description, you will find hyperlinked playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music, plus a full track listing should those hyperlinks not work on your pod platform of choice. I'm nothing if not determined to get those songs into your ears. So let's not stand on ceremony today, let's get back to the music. Track 8 of our episode today starts with us back with the Thin White Duke. So we last met Bowie on his own in 1981. He had just finished Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, a record that finally achieved the perfect precarious balance between his avant-garde Berlin era and actual chart-topping pop success. But behind the scenes, he was in a state of high-stakes limbo. He was nearing the end of his contract with RCA, a label he felt had failed to properly promote his more experimental work and instead put out compilations. Even more critically, he was waiting for the sunset of a notoriously restrictive deal with his former manager, Tony DeFries, whose company, Main Man, still claimed up to 50% of his gross earnings in perpetuity. By early 1981, Bowie had effectively retreated to Switzerland to wait out those legal clocks. He lived discreetly, partly to escape the taxman and partly to avoid the suffocating trappings of his own celebrity. He wasn't looking to record a real album yet, much to the frustration of RCA executives who were desperate for a new hit. But then director Paul Schrader came calling. Schrader was remaking the 1942 horror classic Cat People, and he wanted a theme song that captured the film's dark, erotic weirdness. He paired Bowie with the father of disco, Giorgio Moroder, who had already composed most of the music. In July 1981, Bowie met Moroder at Mountain Studios in Montreux, Switzerland, a studio famously owned by the band Queen. And as we know from episode 32.5, in a remarkable stroke of rock and roll serendipity, Queen was in the studio at that exact same time, recording their album Hot Space. After Bowie contributed some backing vocals to their track Cool Cat, the musicians stayed up for a spontaneous marathon session that would eventually produce the classic collaboration Under Pressure. But it was during this same brief window that Bowie wrote the lyrics and recorded his vocals for Cat People. The session was legendary for its efficiency. Moroder later recalled that Bowie sang the track twice and was finished in less than an hour. This is track 8, playlist 39. Press play now. And we're back. That was the original 1981 version, the one with the slow burn, the moody synths, and that incredible 2-minute long build-up. Musically, Moroder built the track around a minimalist new wave structure, using just 2 main chord changes. Bowie's lyrics were a dreamlike reflection of the film's plot, focusing on a nightmare state rather than a literal summary. He delivered the vocal in a deep sepulchral baritone that suddenly vaults into a thrilling octave leap on the word gasoline, a moment positively received on release. Robert Hilburn of the Los Angeles Times hailed Bowie's vocal performance as one of his finest in years, though Mojo ranked it as his 54th best song. Released as a single in March 1982 via Moroder's label MCA Records, the song became an international hit. It topped the charts in New Zealand, Norway, Sweden and Finland. In the UK, it reached number 26, and in the US, hit number 67, which was actually his highest American chart placement since Golden Years in 1975. However, the story of Cat People took a turn when Bowie officially signed his new massive deal with EMI America in early 1983. He wanted the song for his upcoming album Let's Dance, but the original version was tied to MCA. Consequently, in December 1982, Bowie returned to the studio, this time at the Power Station in New York, to re-record the track with producer Nile Rodgers and then a little-known blues guitarist named Stevie Ray Vaughan. This second version was faster, more aggressive, and leaned heavily into a blues rock territory. It also notably omitted the second entire verse, making it a leaner, more radio-friendly version, but arguably less atmospheric. While Nile Rodgers later noted that Bowie was initially disappointed with the original soundtrack version's minimalism, many fans and critics still regard the 1981 Moroder recording as the definitive, more haunting take. The song eventually received a Grammy nomination in 1984 for Best Rock Vocal Performance, though it ultimately lost to Michael Jackson's Beat It. And if you're going to lose to anyone, it may as well be Jacko. By that time, however, the success of the Let's Dance album had already cemented Bowie's status as a global icon. Next up, we are a year on from Bucks Fizz's Eurovision success, and it's time to see if the UK could replicate that victory. But let's face it, it's a track that had to follow an impossible act, a song engineered to conquer Europe, and a performance that eventually became a textbook example of how quickly a perfectly polished pop moment can unravel on live television. This is Bardo with One Step Further. Track 9, playlist 39. As we know well by now, the year prior, Bucks Fizz hadn't just won the Eurovision Song Contest with Making Your Mind Up, they had used it as a launching point for a strong level of success. That famous skirt rip wasn't just a gimmick, it was a structural shift that proved you could win the contest with a high energy routine and a specific brand of managed pop. Following that victory, the UK was hosting the contest in Harrogate, and the pressure on the BBC to repeat that success was enormous. They wanted a sequel. Enter Bardo. The duo consisted of Sally-Anne Triplett and Stephen Fisher, a hand-picked team with some pedigree and some battle scars. Sally-Anne was already a Eurovision veteran, having finished third in 1980 as part of the group Prima Donna. She remains one of only 4 people to have represented the UK twice at the contest. Stephen Fisher, meanwhile, was a musical theatre actor who had actually been approached to join the original Bucks Fizz lineup, but had to decline because he was under contract for the musical Godspell. They were managed by Nicola Martin, the same woman who masterminded the Bucks Fizz win, and produced by Andy Hill, who had written and produced the previous year's winner. The song itself, One Step Further, was written by Simon Jeffries. It was a driving piece of synth pop that captured the new pop energy of the early 80s, built around a fast-paced 152 beats per minute beat and a strong vocal delivery. On the 24th of March 1982, Bardo comfortably won the A Song for Europe selection process, beating out other hopefuls. But the transition from the studio to the stage at the Harrogate International Centre on the 24th of April was where things got complicated. If you watch the footage of Bardo's performance in Harrogate, you're seeing a lot of nervous energy and an awful lot of choreography. Sally Ann and Stephen were performing a routine that was arguably more athletic than perhaps they could cope with as singers. They were spinning, kicking and lunging while trying to maintain their vocals, which led to a performance widely criticised for being undermined by nerves and breathlessness. Even the orchestra, conducted by Ronnie Hazelhurst, played the track in a more traditional retro style that clashed with the electronic contemporary feel of the studio recording. Despite being the pre-contest favourites with bookmakers like Ladbrokes, Bardo finished in a disappointing 7th place with 76 points. They received the maximum 12 points from only Luxembourg and Austria. The night was won by Germany's Nicole with Ein bisschen Frieden, a calm acoustic performance that was the total antithesis of Bardo's frenetic energy. Nicole would go on to release that song, and we'll hear it here in Playlist 41 in a few weeks. Interestingly, while the Eurovision jury was lukewarm, the British public thought otherwise. One step further, climbed to number 2 on the UK singles chart in May 1982, becoming the 75th best-selling single of the year and earning a silver disc. However, the duo couldn't maintain the momentum. Follow-up singles Talking Out of Line and Hang On to Your Heart failed to reach the charts, and their planned studio album was shelved as a result. Bardo, as a recording project, effectively ended shortly after, though Triplett and Fisher became romantically linked and remained a couple for several years and had a son together in 1990. Sally Ann Triplett went on to a highly successful career in West End musical theatre, starring in shows like Anything Goes and Guys and Dolls. Bardo remains a fascinating moment in the UK's Eurovision history, proof that winning it once is tough. Winning it a second time in succession is like catching lightning in a bottle. For our next song, we pop across the Atlantic. At this point, MTV is no longer just a weird experiment, it's becoming the supreme arbiter of cool. And standing near the top of this neon-soaked mountain is a group of guys from Worcester, Massachusetts, who spent the entire 1970s being the American Rolling Stones of the barroom blues scene, only to wake up with a surprise hit. We last checked in with the Geils band when they were riding the 6-week number 1 wave of Centerfold back in episode 37. That song was a monster. It was everywhere. But when you have a hit that big, the follow-up becomes the referendum. It's the band saying, we didn't just stumble into this pop thing, we live here now. That follow-up was the title track of their 10th studio album. It starts with a literal click-flash sound, a jagged keyboard riff, and Peter Wolf, a man who was a late-night DJ before he was a rock star, barking out photography metaphors like he's trying to develop a roll of film in a hurricane. This is Freeze Frame. Track 10, press play now. Freeze Frame was released in the US as a single on January the 14th, 1982. It didn't quite hit the summit like Centerfold did, but it was a massive success, peaking at number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 on April the 10th, 1982, and staying there for 4 consecutive weeks. The song was written by lead singer Peter Wolf and keyboardist Seth Justman, with Justman also serving as the producer. By this point, Justman had become the band's engine, having written or co-written every track on the album. He was the one pushing the synthesizers to the front, leading into that pop techno sheen that defined the early 80s. The music video, directed by Seth's brother Paul Justman, was another MTV staple, featuring the band in a stylised photography studio with green screen black and white film snippets appearing behind them. But here's the thing about reaching the summit, the only way left to go is down, and for the Geils band, the descent was fast and surprisingly bitter. Despite the freeze-frame album spending 4 weeks at number 1 and the band opening for the Rolling Stones on a 2-month stadium tour of Europe in June and July of 1982, the internal gears were grinding to a halt. The tension was primarily between Wolf and the band. Wolf was the face, the charismatic frontman who ended up on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine alone in 1982. In 1983, while the band was working on material for a follow-up, the creative differences finally became an unbridgeable canyon. Wolf later explained that the majority of the band wanted to continue in a pop techno way, whereas he felt it wasn't his thing. He didn't just leave. According to Wolf, he was essentially ousted by the other members. The remaining members released one more album, 1984's You're Getting Even While I'm Getting Odd, with Justman and drummer Stephen Joe Bladd taking over on lead vocals. It reached number 80 in America, but its only single, Concealed Weapons, stalled at number 63. Their final recorded effort was the title song for the 1985 horror film Fright Night, which peaked at number 91. By the end of 1985, the Geils band was officially over. Things then turned into a legal drama. While the band reunited sporadically for tours starting in 1999, the namesake himself, John J. Geils, sued his bandmates in 2012. He claimed they were planning to tour without him while using the J. Geils band name, which he alleged violated a trademark agreement. Geils quit the group permanently and never played with them again before his death from natural causes in April 2017. It's a strange, sad ending for a band that for one brief moment in 1982 had the whole world in focus. For track 11, we're now at the moment where the script is flipped and the favour is returned. We're back with Bananarama, but this time as the lead names on a single. 1982 was where the sharp edges of post-punk were being sanded down by something brighter, weirder and undeniably more pop. The last time we caught up with Sarah Darling, Karen Woodward and Siobhan Fahey, collectively known as Bananarama, they were the three cool girls in the background of Funboy 3's hit It Ain't What You Do, It's the Way That You Do It, back in episode 36.5. That track hit number 4 in the UK and basically served as the national introduction to the trio. The story of how they got there is peak early 80s happenstance. Terry Hall, having just split from the Specials, saw a photo of Bananarama in the Face magazine. He already owned their independent Swahili language debut, Ayamwana, and he loved their look. He didn't need session singers, he needed an aesthetic. He invited them to sing on his track, and in return, it was time for the Nanas to lead. They needed a song for their first major label single on Decca's Derham imprint. They dug into the Motown vaults and found a 1964 minor hit by the Velvelettes called He Was Really Saying Something. They shortened the title, kept the boys from Funboy 3 for the Shooby-Doo harmonies, and created a minimalist anthem that redefined the girl group sound for the new wave era. Press play now. Really Saying Something was released on the 29th of March 1982. While it sounds like an effortless party, the track was a calculated piece of pop architecture produced by Dave Jordan along with Funboy 3 themselves. If It Ain't What You Do was the introduction, this was the confirmation. It climbed to number 5 on the UK singles chart, giving both groups their second consecutive top 5 hit within just a few months. The song itself is a fascinating bridge. The original Velvelettes version, written by the heavy-hitting Motown team of Norman Whitfield, William Mickey Stevenson and Edward Holland, is a classic Detroit production. Brassy, polished and soulful. Bananarama and Funboy 3 took that soul and effectively drugged it with 80s club dub sensibilities. They stripped out the orchestra and replaced it with a rhythmic, percussion-heavy arrangement that felt more at home in a London basement than a Motown studio. This single arguably became a mission statement. It served as the lead single for their debut album, Deep Sea Skiving, which wouldn't actually be released until nearly a year later, in March 1983. The B-side, Give Us Back Our Cheap Fares, even added a touch of local social commentary, a nod to the Fares Fair political campaign in London at the time. The video for the song became a staple on the newly launched MTV in America, helping to build the visual brand of the group. Three women who looked like they'd just stepped off a London street wearing clothes they'd often sewn or modified themselves. It was a rejection of the glamorous girl group trope in favour of a DIY post-punk independence. The success of Really Saying Something cemented the trio as more than just a backing act. It proved they could carry a hook, anchor a production, and navigate the transition from indie darlings to mainstream chart toppers without losing their edge. It was the moment Bananarama truly started saying something. For our penultimate track, it's time to delve into the delightful world of the UK chart oddity. We've had a couple already, the comedy track, the television theme tune, but there is one genre we've yet to delve into until now. In the world of the team song, there is a very specific, very British kind of delusion. It's a subgenre of music that shouldn't exist, yet it has been in the charts for decades, usually just before an FA Cup or a World Cup final. You know the formula: take 22 professional footballers, put them in a studio, usually Abbey Road, give them headphones they don't know how to wear, and then ask them to sing a chorus with the enthusiasm of men who would much rather be literally anywhere else. Before New Order showed up in 1990 with World in Motion and decided that maybe a football song should actually be good, we had the 1982 England World Cup squad, and they gave us a track that is both a time capsule of 80s optimism and a masterclass in the shouty choir vocal technique. This is This Time We'll Get It Right, track 12. We're on our way with Ron's 22. I'll freely admit this song lives in my head rent-free. In fact, I'd go so far as to say you very nearly were subjected to two football songs, as Tottenham by Chaz and Dave and the 1982 Tottenham squad also lives in my head rent-free, and they come out at pretty much the exact same time. The novelty of both tracks is burned indelibly into what would have been my 3-year-old brain. And once every few years something makes them resurface. This time, more than any other time, we're going to find a way. And Tottenham, no one can stop them. They flare up like someone driving up the road, and suddenly their inner monologue asks them if they've left the gas on. It is utterly useless information, and yet it lives on in my little brain box. But rather than subject you to both, which I think would be overkill, we're focusing on the England squad's effort. So when we say Ron's 22, I'm talking about Ron Greenwood, the England manager who had finally ended a 12-year drought of England missing out on the World Cup. After failing to qualify in 1974 and 78, the 82 squad headed to Spain with a chip on their shoulder and a very literal promise in their song title. The song itself was written and produced by Chris Norman and Pete Spencer, members of the band Smokey. These were the same guys who had penned Head Over Heels in Love for Kevin Keegan a few years prior. Keegan, of course, was the captain and the star of this particular show, sporting a perm that was arguably the most iconic thing about the 1982 campaign. Released on England Records, the single was a surprise hit, peaking at number 2 in the UK singles chart in April 1982. It even outlasted the Scottish effort of the same year on the charts. It was pressed on 7-inch vinyl, including a picture disc featuring the squad's faces dotted round the circumference. But did they get it right? Well, that depends on your definition of right. England actually went through the entire 1982 first round unbeaten. They won all 3 of their first round group games, but then came the second group stage, a weird format FIFA used back then, where they drew 0-0 with West Germany and 0-0 with the hosts Spain. Because they couldn't find that one elusive goal, they were knocked out. The tragedy, as Ron Greenwood later put it, was that his 2-star engines, Kevin Keegan and Trevor Brooking, were injured for almost the entire tournament. They were finally subbed on with 25 minutes left against Spain to try and save the day. Keegan famously missed a late header that would have sent them through, and just like that, the promise of the song title was left unfulfilled. Decades later, Keegan himself revisited the track for the Special Olympics, admitting that the athletes he recorded with were definitely better singers than the England football team were. It remains a strangely beloved piece of nostalgia, a relic from an era where we thought a catchy chorus and a team of men in V-neck jumpers could actually win the whole thing. For our final track on playlist 39, we pay one of our final visits to Haircut 100. And if you're walking down a British high street, you're seeing them. You're seeing the chunky knit jumpers, the boat shoes, and the kind of fringe that requires a dedicated maintenance schedule. You're seeing Haircut 100. They are the clean cut 100, the boys next door of the new pop explosion. They've already conquered the charts with the rhythmic jitters of Favourite Shirts, Boy Meets Girl, and the tropical bliss of Love Plus One. By March 1982, their debut album Pelican West is sitting at number 2 on the UK charts. They are, for a fleeting moment, the top dogs in a country obsessed with their clean-sounding pop and knitwear. But it's also fleeting. Here's the thing about pop music in 1982, it moves fast, and Nick Haywood, the band's 20-year-old architect, is moving even faster. He is pushing the band to turn glorified jam sessions into 3-minute pop songs. And that brings us to the third single from Pelican West, a song that feels like a sigh of relief, but one built on the foundation of a great amount of strain. This is Fantastic Day, track 13, our final song on playlist 39. We last checked in with Haircut 100 in early 1982 when Love Plus One was reaching number 3 in the UK. By April, they released Fantastic Day and it peaked at number 9 on the UK singles chart. On the surface, it's the ultimate feel-good record, defined by Graham Jones's tight rhythmic guitar lines and a sunny mix of jazz funk. But the fantastic part has a darker origin. Nick Haywood has noted that the song was born out of a period when he felt really dark due to the winter and frustration in London. The opening line, "Well, there's a great amount of strain about getting on that train," was a literal reflection of his anxiety. He has since described the track as a form of positive affirmation, where he intentionally took those feelings of strain and turned them into a chorus of optimism to take a sad song and make it better. The recording of Pelican West took place at Chalk Farm's Roundhouse Studios, produced by Bob Sargent. By this stage, the band was a 6-piece. Nick Haywood, vocals and guitar, Les Neames on bass, Graham Jones on guitar, Phil Smith on saxophone, Mark Fox on percussion, and Blair Cunningham on drums. Haywood viewed Cunningham, a Memphis native, as their ace up their sleeve for his ability to bring authentic funk to their suburban London sound. By the time Fantastic Day was climbing the charts, the team effort Haywood often spoke of, likening his role to Paul McCartney in the Get Back film, was starting to feel less like a collaboration and more like a burden. Nick was the chief songwriter, the face and the director. He was pushing the group to turn what he called glorified jam sessions into 3-minute pop perfection. But the pressure was immense. Signed to Arista in 1981, they were global stars by early 82. The schedule was relentless, constant touring and a soul-crushing expectation to deliver a second album by Christmas. The fractures weren't public yet. On the surface, they were still the clean-cut 100, the boys next door in cricket jumpers. But behind the scenes, stress was manifesting as physical and mental exhaustion for Haywood. He later admitted to struggling with depression and burnout, even recounting a mental night in Camden where he hid in a car park, paranoid and overwhelmed. Sessions for a second album actually began in 1982. They would eventually release Nobody's Fool as a bridge single that reached number 9 in September. This is a song we'll hear later on this podcast. But by then the wheels were starting to truly come off as absence, poor mental health, and the expectation to create magic came not just from the label but also from the band. The end was near. But for a moment, in the spring of 1982, it really was a fantastic day. We shall see Haircut 100 one last time. What an interesting episode. The fracture of Haircut 100 always gets me. 3 utterly blisteringly good hits with Favourite Shirts, Love Plus One and Fantastic Day, and all that adulation, and then it all goes wrong quite quickly. But as we'll see, that actually happens quite a lot in the 80s. But where one band falls, another rises. So do join us next week as we continue to mine the rich vein that is April 1982. As the first half of Playlist 40 features Macca and Stevie Wonder together, it's a big week for introductions as we meet Hot Chocolate, Yazoo, The Fix, Junior and Talk Talk. And Patrice Rushton releases a single which not only becomes a hit, but backstops a movie franchise involving Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. It's going to be a fun one. If you've liked what you've heard and want to help fund it continuing, you can find a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page in the episode description. And if you're feeling particularly generous and want to leave a review, please, it all helps. But until next time, thanks ever so much for listening and have a happy, healthy week. Take care.